Yeah.
By the way, Hargraves, who the Texans picked up, is inactive today.
Inactive?
Yes, along with Roby and Will Fuller, among others. It's the Baltimore Game Day Uncensored pregame show. Let's take a look at that injury report.
The Injury Report is sponsored by Orthopedic Associates of Central Maryland. In pain, contact the experts at Orthopedic Associates of Central Maryland by visiting mdbonedocs.com. Care this good feels good to the bone.
Injury Report.
And joining us now live is Dr. Scott Adams. And Dr. Adams, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
So let's start with Michael Pierce. Hurt his ankle, allegedly. Allegedly it's an ankle, against the Bengals. He's inactive today. Just give me your professional best guess of what you think's going on there.
Yeah, so this is probably a sprain. I mean, they came out and said he had x-rays, and those x-rays were negative. So that tells us that, in theory, there shouldn't be any injury to the bone, no fracture, no break. And then x-rays can also tell if there is such a severe ankle sprain that there's now instability, which is a more significant injury where you think long-term time missed. So the fact that the x-rays were read as negative and they reported they were negative makes you think this is a sprain, and the fact that they said he's day-to-day suggests that once the swelling is down and once the motion is back and once he just feels comfortable on the ankle, he should be good to go. So with all of that information, I don't think this should be a particularly long absence.
And Doc, he did it on the first play of the game and went out and then came back the next series for 2 plays, and then he was gone the rest of the time. Talk about how, say that it was a guy that's 180 pounds sprains his ankle compared to a guy 360.
Yeah, good point. And the heavier you are, the more stress you're putting on that injury. And so I think someone who is on the lighter side may be able to play through a little bit more than someone who's a little bit heavier. And some of the joints, you don't look at it as they're just 200 pounds heavier. The joints feel magnitudes of weight more. So you might feel 3 to 5 times your body weight across joints with certain activities. So that extra weight is for sure going to be a little more painful, and you're going to need to rest it a little bit longer just because you are putting more stress over it.
Dr. Adams, obviously not much else going on with the Ravens, so let's talk about the most famous hip in America, and that's Tua Tagovailoa, who got hurt yesterday. What's going on there? What do you think his prognosis is?
Sure. This is obviously a tough injury. So we're talking about the ball in the socket joint of the hip, and what it sounds like happened was that the ball dislocated out of the socket. Now, what else has been shared, which I think has to have been leaked out, was that when the ball popped out of the socket, it broke the socket as it hit against it and then dislocated. That can be a game changer, and it comes down to how big the piece is that broke, because that can lead to additional instability, and if it's a big enough piece, that can sometimes require surgery to fix it so that you can then put the ball back in the socket and it doesn't pop back out. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is anytime you have a hip dislocation, the big risk is have you affected the blood supply to the ball, and that's the Bo Jackson analogy that everyone's been talking about. And by all indications, the hip was reduced very quickly, so the ball was popped back into the socket, and the quicker you do that, the less likely the blood supply is going to be affected. But the problem is you won't know that for some time. So he not only has to recover from a dislocated hip, he has to recover from a break in the socket of the hip, and then there's this less predictable future forward where was the blood supply affected. So by all indications, this is about as bad a hip injury as you can get, but not only for long-term health, but, I mean, the Ravens don't even have to look much further than Dennis Pitta.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at somebody who had a very good career and then suffered similar hip dislocations and obviously cut his career short, and here's someone in college. So I think NFL teams have to keep that in mind. I think he and his overall health for the rest of his life has to keep that in mind, but this is not a good injury for anybody, especially a mobile quarterback.
Well, speaking of that, Doc, how much, because he was playing on a bad ankle.
Yeah.
You know, and trying to run away. Maybe if he was healthy, he's able to get away from those guys, you know, and maybe because he was hobbling, that put the hip more at risk.
Yeah, I think probably the only link in Alabama's defense, because I'm sure there are a lot of folks out there that want to blame Alabama for putting him in, maybe not 100% with his ankle, but I think, honestly, the only link would be if he was 100% healthy, could he have avoided the tackle?
Yep.
I don't think his injury in the ankle led in any way to the injury in the hip, except for the fact that he may have been more mobile had he not been injured. This was unbelievably unlucky. I mean, you watch the play unfold, and you can see his knee get driven into the turf, and that drove his hip backwards, and as a result, the ball popped out of the socket, broke the socket, and the rest is still being evaluated. But I think that's probably the only link that people could really contribute the ankle to the hip.
Dr. Scott Adams, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thanks, Doc.
Appreciate it. It's the Baltimore Game Day Uncensored pregame show. Ken Wyman, Mike Preston, Vinny Serrato. When we come back, we will climb the depth chart. We'll hear from Texans head coach Bill O'Brien, and we'll also get our first look at the weather. It is the Baltimore Game Day Uncensored pregame show. We're live.